Previously, Toxic Rain was a build that you could absolutely melt every single bit of content in the game with very little investment. You could kill all the bosses, you could kill all the content, you could do all the way up into the highest tiers of content without investing too much into the build. But is Toxic Rain still that overpowered even post-nerfs? Well, not exactly. Toxic Rain has kind of turned from a build that was absolutely able to smash all content to being something that is more of a farming build. Now, the footage that you're seeing in the background right now is of the budget version of this build. What most people have realized is that Toxic Rain is probably best just made as a league start build, a farming build, and then transition into a different kind of character. So what you're seeing in the background is the budget version. This is just a corrupted tabula rasa for 20C. This is a Thief's Torment ring and a Quill Rain. There's nothing else specialty going on about this. I have most of my overpowered gear, as you might call it, taken off, even though most of it's not that expensive. It's just very simple uniques, a couple random rares, and nothing much else. And we're able to pretty confidently take down high red tier content, including ultimatums and everything else, without it being too big of a deal. This mostly being because of dodge and evasion mechanics, as well as our extreme recovery due to Thief's Torment. However, I want you to be warned that this build is not a boss character until you do invest some. Now, what do I mean by investment? I mean that you're going to have to create a spell bow, you're going to have to get some cluster jewels, and you're going to have to be okay getting a couple expensive pieces of gear. Now, the footage that you're seeing now is going to be the more expensive gear. I have not fully invested into this character because I realized that I didn't actually need to. But the footage that you're seeing is going to be a fully done spell bow, as well as a Kintsugi and a Asinus chant, as well as some more expensive jewels and some cluster jewels. Now, that all being said, the single target damage still isn't amazing. So how are we possibly able to farm multiple Exalts an hour with this build? Well, the answer is Heist. Now, I had said this previously on my Toxic Rain Trickster, that the Toxic Rain Trickster was absolutely amazing for Heist because you could simply just phase through everything, you had excellent recovery, you could kill enemies while moving, and you didn't really have to worry too much about your damage. The Raider turns this into overdrive. We move extremely quickly, like a ridiculous speed, and because we're able to kill all of the enemies in Heist, we can almost completely ignore most enemies, can stand in their face and not die. We can run through these zones insanely fastly and get some massive loot. So if you want to be able to farm multiple Exalts an hour and move at absolute ludicrous speeds while destroying ultimatums, then let's get into the guide. Hey guys, Big Ducks here, and welcome back to the channel. Now, it might seem toxic when I always ask you to like this video, but it's just so that YouTube will recommend you more of this content if you are enjoying it. Also, over 74% of you are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel. So if you're enjoying my particular style of content, make sure that you subscribe so that these videos will show right up in your feed, and you can always change your mind later. Now, without further ado, let's get into the guide. Alright boys, so remember, there are going to be a bunch of different sections in this video, so if you want to jump to a specific part, make sure to check out the timestamps and chapters down in the description of this video. So I have been pretty busy recently, and I've been playing this build for quite some time now, probably a good 2 or 3 weeks. This is a Toxic Rain Raider. You might be asking, Big Ducks, I thought you played Toxic Rain Trickster. Well, the problem is that Toxic Rain got a pretty heavy-handed nerf in this league, and it didn't end up being exactly what I wanted it to be, so I decided that I'd go a completely different route with it. Now, a lot of people have been playing the Toxic Rain Raider just because of the zoom movement speed. I mean, like, let's look at this. Like, look at how fast you can actually move with this build. It's kind of ridiculous. Raider just moves absolutely insanely quickly. With very, very little investment, you just get some real big zooms. But what is Toxic Rain? If you've never used Toxic Rain before, it is a ranged ability. It is a bow ability that you shoot into the air and it drops these little pods on the ground. Now, these pods here each are an individual hit and they do damage over time. Chaos damage over time, that is. We scale this damage with Chaos damage over time multiplier as well as gem levels. One cool thing about this build is that you really can start from about level 12 with Toxic Rain and keep it all the way through the game, play it as your only ability. I do add Caustic Arrow in as a leveling ability early on. You'll see all of that in the path of building, but for the most part, you can start with Toxic Rain and end with Toxic Rain. It is a very powerful ability through all stages of the game. It is okay at single target nowadays, but it's mainly used for clearing. Now, with Toxic Rain, originally when I started playing this build, I was like, well, it seems like a really good league start build. It seems like something that I could farm up to like red tier maps with and I'd probably move on. However, I sat down and I thought to myself, is there something else that I can do with this build? Well, it turns out that there was. And if we go take a look on our stash tab and you see this tab right here, which is H and then a $sign, you'll see a tab here that has a pretty decent amount of just random currency in it. You'll notice we have like 12 Exalt, 141 Chaos, a bunch of divines, bunch of ancient orbs, a ton of jeweler's fusings and chromatic orbs, and among other things. Now, beyond this, we also have this tab, which has quite a bit of things in it. We have this tab, which has quite a bit of things in it, and then this tab, which is just starting up. I farmed all of this in just a few days. Now, the actual full amount of money when we sell all of this, like some of these cards, like this is a nurse card here, there's some pretty interesting stuff in here that's worth quite a bit. All of these tabs, according to Exilents, are worth 8,500 chaos, which evens out to be around like 55x. And I did this all pretty easily. It didn't require anything specialty, no gear, not really a lot of upfront costs, and it was all through Heist. Now, if you haven't seen the video already, you can see the first steps of it, which was just in preparation, which I made around 30 Exalts in just a few days doing deception contracts. That video is going to be linked up in the top right corner. Go take a look at it there. I used this build for that, and you don't need anything special. Now, you might be seeing in my gear, I have like an Ascendancy, I've got a Kintsugi, I've got a crafted spellbow, as well as, you know, I have like a Vitality Watcher's Eye, a Thread of Hope, all this cool stuff, right? Well, you don't need any of that. You can actually run this build perfectly fine with a Corrupted Tabula, a Quill Rain, 4-link is perfectly fine, as well as a Thief's Torment, and it will actually work all the way through all of the stuff that I'm going to tell you. You can do all of it with just that, no problem whatsoever. Damage is not an issue for this build. It's not something that you need to worry about when you're doing Heist. All that you need to be able to do is survive and be able to run fast, and this build does both of those things quite well. The idea is that we are just mainly focusing on not dying and running fast, as I said. Now, over on my stream at twitch.tv/BigDuts, which you should follow by the way, we have been doing a pretty big experiment, and that is with Unusual Gems blueprints. Now, we are going to be running 100 of these. We've been going for probably 5 or 6 days, and we're about 25 blueprints in, and we've already made like 50 plus Exalt at this point. So we're going to be checking that out, so if you want to come see how that's going, make sure to come and find me over on Twitch. A video will come out about that in a few days once I'm finished with all the blueprints, and I'll tell you my findings. The initial findings is that it's going quite well. Now back to the character. So Toxic Rain. There aren't a lot of abilities that we use on this character. The first ability that we're going to talk about is going to be Withering Step. Now, a lot of people like to use Wither Totems on this build. However, I am not a fan of Wither Totems because I enjoy using Withering Step. Now, with Withering Step, you can actually apply 6 debuffs, like 6 stacks of Wither, instantly with this ability. So you'll notice that when you pop Withering Step, you'll get this green circle around you, but then it disables your movement skills, essentially, like they stop recovering. The reason for that is that as soon as you use another ability, that effect ends. So the idea is that when you're fighting a boss and you're constantly attacking and moving here, you're going to be keeping roughly 12 stacks of Wither on a boss at any time, as long as you're staying near them. The other thing that Withering Step does is it makes you run extremely quickly. As long as you have this up and you're not attacking, you've got almost full stacks of Elusive, which is going to give you a ton of dodge, and it's just going to make you move very fast. So not only can you use it offensively, but you can also use it to just absolutely zoom through enemies, which is very useful in Heist. Make sure that you watch later into the video, because I'm actually going to be showing you a contract and how quickly we can move through them with this ability. Now, the next ability that we use is actually Toxic Rain. I talked about this a little bit earlier. The main thing is that you pop Toxic Rain, it pops out a bunch of pods, and these pods explode, causing individual damage over time effects that stack. Now, previously, you could actually get quite a few of these overlapping. Nowadays, I think it's in the 3 to 4 range without investing into a lot of less area, like concentrated effect and really pumping that, but I haven't really worried too much about that because I don't really feel it's worthwhile to push this build in that direction. It takes a lot of work to get this build to be an absolute massive single target monster. And trust me, you can farm the currency with this build to be able to turn it into a monster, but I don't actually think that's necessary. For just a few Exalt, you can make a build that is able to absolutely fund everything else that you want to play for the entirety of the league. So why worry about it? You can push it if you'd like to, but that's not something that we're going to be focusing on. Now beyond that, we do use Flame Dash as our movement skill. You can use normal dash if you like. I prefer Flame Dash just because it's instant if you don't spam it. We do use Blood Rage while clearing. I actually don't use Blood Rage very often in Heist simply because we don't worry about doing more damage, we're just worried about surviving. Blood Rage is going to make you lose some life occasionally. And we use 4 auras. Now, you don't have to use all of these auras, but this is the way that I have it set up. The 2 main auras that we're using are Malevolence. This is going to give us more damage over time, as well as increased skill effect duration, which is going to increase our damage. Skill effect duration makes our debuff last longer, makes us do more damage. And then we also use Flesh and Stone in Sand Stance to keep nearby enemies blinded, as well as taking less damage from enemies that are far away. This is a huge defensive line, and it is very good for the build because we're trying to not die. Beyond that, I do use a Clarity. I think mine is level 11, if I remember. No, it's level 10. This is how I'm sustaining most of my mana right now, and we also do use a level 1 Vitality, but that is because I have a Watcher's Eye. Now, I have a Vitality Watcher's Eye. These are a few Exalts, but they're not needed for the build. you can simply run a Thief's Torment and that will do more than fine with the budget setup with a Thief's Torment and a Quill Rain. Absolutely fine to just use those. And then beyond that, you might be seeing this Ball Lightning that's shooting out. Now this is a question I get asked most often about this build. Big Ducks, why do you got Ball Lightning in your build? Well, because we have this Watcher's Eye that gives us life gain for each enemy hit while affected by Vitality. Notice that it doesn't say spells and it doesn't say attacks, it just says hit. So the idea is that we take this Ball Lightning, we link it with greater multiple projectiles and slower projectiles, and it means that it's going to be hitting close to the cap, which is around 13 times on every single enemy. Now, if you think that every enemy around you is getting hit 13 times, we're getting about 25 life for each of that. That's a lot of recovery. You don't have to use Ball Lightning. It does require the Ascendancy. You could probably put like a Frost Bomb in here for normal mapping so you could deal with Maven and things like that, but this is perfectly fine like this. I like it because it just keeps us topped off in those kind of sticky situations. We also do have a Despair in here. This is just to give us a little bit of extra damage. It's a good curse to use. You could always just get the Flask that gives you Despair here and replace one of your flasks down here. You don't have to worry about that too much. And that is going to be pretty much it for our abilities. Now, when it comes to gear, as I said, if you're just going to do Heist or some simple farming with this build, you can just grab a Quill Rain, you can grab a Corrupted Tabula with +2 to level of AoE, and you can grab a Thief's Torment and just a bunch of other just random rares that you can find. My gear is honestly not insane. I haven't spent very much on it. I mainly have spent money on like flasks and Watcher's Eyes and things like that, but beyond that we haven't spent too much. My gloves are... Chat likes to mess with me about my gloves. They complain about them literally every single day. These gloves are mirror tier, boys. You can't get better than these. But chat would tell you otherwise. My boots are pretty mediocre. This quiver is just whatever. I'm using a quiver that I found that's kind of ridiculous actually, but this is the quiver I was using in the budget version, and then I just have a simple amulet with minus mana cost. I do use the Ascendancy, but for the budget version I actually took out all the spells out of here, so it was literally just attack speed, mana regen, and movement speed. A simple belt, some whatever here. I do have some cluster jewels. I do have one cluster jewel, which is actually pretty cheap. It is a bow cluster jewel, an 8 passive, damage with bows and damage over time, fuel the fight, martial prowess, and tempered arrowheads. I've talked about this cluster jewel quite a few times before. People always say, well, why don't you go with the Chaos cluster jewel? It's more damage. It's like 5% more damage and typically significantly more expensive than this one. This one's super easy to get, super easy to roll. You actually don't need all 3 of these. You can just go for tempered arrowheads and one of the other ones. I bought this for like 40C. And it's an absolutely excellent cluster jewel, gets us some more room for better jewels, and then beyond that we are using a intuitive leap. This just allows us to get charisma as well as these points up here. It helps us with using all of these different auras that we're using. The Thread of Hope is actually really good for this build. It does give us access to these increased duration nodes over here, which are very powerful, lots of damage, and it lets us grab Harrier, some movement speed, some attack speed, and then we also gain some power frenzy endurance charges on kill. That gets us a ton of good stuff. It saves us a bunch of points. We make back most of the resistances here with just these 2 points. If you need the fire, you can grab the fire as well. A very simple build. There's not really much to it. We mainly survive off of dodge as well as evasion. We do use the combination of Wind Dancer and Kintsugi. Kintsugi has come down in price a decent amount recently. Right now, if I'm looking at it correctly, it's about 45C, I think is what it is. You don't need this linked. You can just toss your auras in here if you need. And this plus Wind Dancer gives you a ton of defensives. Now, I only have 4,400 life, and yet I will run heists with pretty crazy mods on them for like 6 straight hours and die maybe 1 time. Because the way that this works is that we don't get hit very often because of dodge and because of evasion. So it says 20% less damage taken if you haven't been hit recently. Kintsugi also says 20% less damage taken if you've not been hit recently. So those two combined essentially increases our life pool by like 40% as long as we haven't been hit recently. Now the way that it works is most of the time that you die on this build, it's because you get hit multiple times in a row. It's very unlikely because we have 65 to 75% dodge and spell dodge as well as like 80 to 90% evasion rating. It's very rare that we get hit multiple times in a row, but it does happen, and that's typically around when you die. You could push this build up to like 5,000, 6,000 life if you really wanted to. You could also get a Timeless Jewel. I think it's Shibako is the name of it. I might be wrong on that. It's the one that makes it so that you have more chaos resist and you take elemental damage as chaos damage. You could absolutely do that. You could grab some of these chaos resist nodes here. You could get maximum chaos resist. If you look at my bow, it actually does have +1 to maximum chaos resist. That would make you even more tanky. I haven't really invested in that because I haven't felt it worthwhile. I'm doing perfectly fine with just most of my gear, but that's really most of what you need for the build. Now, I have kind of talked about the acinus and all of this, but the thing I haven't talked about yet is the bow. Now, the bow is not required by any means. If you do want to craft a Toxic Rain bow, I do have a video for that actually, which is going to be linked up in the top right corner. This bow is relatively straightforward to craft, but the cost is always going to be consistent. It's around 7 Exalt to craft this bow most of the time. That's including buying the base, rolling the initial modifiers, and crafting all of the mods on it. It's going to be around 7 Exalt flat, pretty much no matter what, just because you use a bunch of crafts on it. You could absolutely get this bow perfectly fine with just a day or two of farming in Heist just by doing contracts, no issue whatsoever. For our flasks, we are going to be completely immune because we are a raider. We don't have to worry about any elemental debuffs because we do have Avatar of the Veil, so we're only really going to be worried about bleed immunity as well as curse immunity. That's the only things that we really have to worry about. We do use a Experimenter's Jade Flask of Adrenaline. The extra evasion does give us quite a bit of defensives, and then we're using a Dying Sun just to give us a little bit more clear. We're also using a Cinder Swallow. Now remember with Cinder Swallow that if you do get any source of fire damage and you crit at all, you can make use of the enemies take 10% increased damage while they're ignited during this flask. You can see that my Toxic Rain does 11 to 23 fire damage. As long as I crit at all at any point, I will ignite. It's a guaranteed ignite when you crit with any amount of fire damage. So the idea is that my Toxic Rain has a 6.8% chance to ignite, meaning that if I'm just sitting here casting constantly, one of these out of the like 50 or so that pop on enemies will probably ignite, meaning that it will eventually do that kind of damage. You don't need anything specialty on here, just make sure that you get the life and mana recovery as high as you can. The crit is actually probably not great for this. I mean, it's going to help you get that damage more, but going with something like movement speed or maybe something like stun avoidance or things like that might actually be better. And that is going to be pretty much it for the gear. Now, when it comes to the skill tree, this is a very, very standard Toxic Rain skill tree. It has not changed very much in quite some time. It is almost exactly the same as my old Toxic Rain Trickster skill tree. Most of that is going to be in the path of building. Make sure that you check that out. It's got full leveling trees, everything that you need in there. The only real differences are probably going to be that I'm using an intuitive leap in this area now. Beyond that, I think almost everything is exactly the same. There's like a couple points that I've shifted around in some places, but really beyond that, it's mainly just going to be the Ascendancy, which we'll talk about now. Now, why Raider? As I said, Raider is extremely fast. The reason that you go this Ascendancy is because of these Onslaught nodes. It makes you move insanely fast. Now you might be saying, Big Ducks, if you're not worried about doing damage and you just want to go fast, why aren't you going the Frenzy nodes? Well, the idea is that perma-phasing is really, really super useful on this build. When we're running through Heist, when we're running through ultimatums, when we're running through maps, just being absolutely completely phased through no matter what, no matter flash charges or anything like that is super, super useful. It gives us a bunch of dodge, and then this just does make us immune to elemental ailments. I think that if you wanted to, you probably could swap Avatar of the Veil out for Way of the Poacher if you just wanted to generate frenzy charges all the time, but I do feel that the movement speed here, as well as nearby enemies having less accuracy, is pretty useful, as well as, of course, the immune to elemental ailments. It's pretty solid. Now, the main reason, like I said before, is going to be Rapid Assault and Avatar of the Chase. This gives us Onslaught permanently. It's always on us, and it's going to give us a bunch of attack, cast, and movement speed. And then we do get increased Onslaught effect, as well as this giving us 100% increased Onslaught effect, as well as more chance to evade. This makes it so that it's very hard to hit us, we move very fast, and we attack very fast, which is all very powerful for this build. The idea is that Raider, it seems like a pretty good choice at the moment. You could probably still run Trickster if you want to, but I just don't think that the Trickster has enough going for it to really make up for that damage, so why not just go faster? Now, you guys already saw some mapping that I did earlier. Those were like high tier red maps. So what we're going to do is we're going to do some contracts. I'm going to show you how a contract looks, how we can absolutely zoom through things. Hopefully I have a deception contract. I don't actually know if I have one or not, so let's find out. So of course, I don't have a deception contract on hand, but we're going to run a lockpicking contract instead. Now, the idea is that most modifiers are completely fine in here. The ones you want to avoid are going to be dodge, the alerts going off instantly, as well as no regen, because that's going to be where most of our mana actually comes from. So we're just going to run this contract here. I've got pretty much all my rogues leveled up. Like I said, I'll talk more about the specifics of all of this in that video that's going to be coming up, but I'll give you an idea of how it works. Now, we go into the contract, and the only thing that really matters to us is going to be these large chests. And because our build does move so fast, as you can see, we just absolutely zoom through here, no problem whatsoever. Now, for most contracts, we're going to be running deception contracts, which are a little bit different from most other contracts, but for right now, we are just mainly worried about currency chests. Those are the main things that are useful when it comes to lockpicking contracts. This build just ignores pretty much everything. You just run around, you don't really worry about killing any of the enemies, they're mostly irrelevant. You come in here, you grab the boxes that you need, and you get out. You might be wondering, like, well, if you don't do enough damage, how are you going to be able to maintain, and how are you going to be able to survive on the way out? Well, we honestly just kind of ignore everything on the way out. Something that's really cool is that because we have phasing, because we have so much dodge, and because we have so much evasion, we just kind of ignore stuff. You see how I just ran through it and pretty much didn't worry about it at all? This is an eye level 83 contract, keep that in mind, but you saw us take a pretty big hit there, right? What you'll notice is that although we took that really big hit, it only did about half of our health and then we recovered it back pretty quickly. We don't get hit often enough for it to really matter to us. Like, yeah, we will die occasionally, every so often, but I mean, that's inevitable in a dodge build. But for the most part, we take one big hit, recover back up to full, and then by the time that we take the next big hit, we're not really too worried about it. So we come to the end, I'll open the safes because we found a nurse card out of one of these safes one time, I'll probably never find something as good ever again. Grab the item, and you just zoom right out. Now, in Deception contracts, you don't have to worry about opening any doors or doing anything, but this is exactly what you do on the way out. I've been running a lot of blueprints recently, so I'm kind of used to not being able to just instantly zoom out of here anymore. But you'll see, even through this straight door, you just kind of ignore everything. It doesn't really matter that, you know, all of this stuff is in your way. You just say, you know, whatever, peace. You run through. Whenever you get caught in little situations like this, you can attack just to get your health up, but for the most part, these enemies are pretty worthless. They made it so that the enemies take like 2 or 3 seconds to use all of their abilities, so now we kind of can just run directly through them, and that's why the Raider is so powerful. Because of that permaphasing and because of that movement speed, you get to just ignore everything. And that's kind of how it goes. That's how blueprints go, that's how contracts go. You don't worry about killing anything, you zoom right through, and you're done. And that is pretty much all that you need to know about the build. It runs really fast, it doesn't take very much damage, doesn't get hit very often, and does enough damage to be able to get through anything that you really do want. Now when it comes to bossing, this character can boss, but you are going to need to invest pretty heavily. You're going to need cluster jewels, you're going to need the spell bow, and you're going to need to make sure that you get all of the proper gear to be able to do that kind of damage. It is not the best bossing character anymore, I want to make that clear. This is mainly a farming character, but it does the farming absolutely amazingly. So if you're doing a late league start and you want to catch up and you want to get some currency, or you've never really tried to farm heist before and you want to do some like really big brain heist farming strats, this is probably one of the best builds that you could do it with. And that is going to be it for the video. So this is an absolutely wonderful build that I've been enjoying a lot. It's made me enjoy heist quite a bit more than I ever thought that I would. I really didn't think that I'd be a dirty heist lover once again after the 4 months of pain that we had back in Heist League. But if you have any further questions about this build, you can always check me out on my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/bigducks. Be happy to answer your questions there. I'm there Monday through Friday, about 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern. So if I'm not able to answer your question or I'm not live, make sure to join my Discord. Both of those are linked down in the description. I got a bunch of helpful community members that'd be more than happy to help you with anything related to my content. And I'd like for you to be a part of my community as well. So remember, boys, if you enjoyed this content, make sure that you like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I'll see you guys in the next video.